Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about fractions and decimals, more specifically about number lines counting by fifths. To get us started, here we have a number line. And notice that in between 0 and 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. And then in between 1 and 2, we also have 5 spaces. And in between 2 and 3, we also have 5 spaces. That means it takes 5 spaces to make a whole. So this number line is counting up by fifths. So our second value is going to be 2 fifths, then 3 fifths, then 4 fifths, and then 5 fifths. Notice that 5 out of 5 is above 1, and that's because 5 out of 5 is equivalent to 1. And this is because it takes 5 spaces in order to make one whole. After 5 over 5, we have 6 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 1/5. Then we have 7 over 5, so we're going to just continue this pattern increasing by 1/5. And 7 over 5 is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 2 over 5. Then we have 8 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 3 over 5. Then we have 9 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 1 and 4 over 5. Then we have 10 over 5, which can be simplified to 2. Then we have 11 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 1 over 5. Then we have 12 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 2 over 5. Then we have 13 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 3 over 5. Then we have 14 over 5, which is an improper fraction that can be written as 2 and 4 over 5. And then we have 15 over 5, which can be simplified to 3. Now, we don't need our improper fractions here because we've already written them as either a whole number or a mixed number. So here we have a number line counting by fifths. So if we had a vertical number line that also had 5 spaces in between each whole number, then we would know that it's also counting up by fifths. So we would have 0, then we would have 1/5, then 2 fifths, then 3 fifths, 4 fifths, 1, then 1 and 1/5, 1 and 2 fifths, 1 and 3 fifths, 1 and 4 fifths, 2, 2 and 1/5, 2 and 2 fifths, 2 and 3 fifths, 2 and 4 fifths, and 3. So let's take this number line and now convert our fractions to decimals. Starting off with 1/5, in order to convert a fraction to a decimal, we have to go ahead and divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So we have 1 divided by 5, where 1 is going to be our dividend, and 5 is going to be our divisor. So now we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 1? Well, 5 does not go into 1, so we're going to put a 0 here. Then add a decimal point after the 1. Then add a 0 and make sure that you bring up the decimal point. Now, ignoring the decimal point we added, we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 10? Well, 5 goes into 10 2 times, and that's because 5 times 2 is equal to 10. We're going to write the 10 underneath and then subtract. 10 minus 10 is equal to 0. That means we have no remainder, and 1 over 5 is equal to 2/10. Now we're going to move on to 2 over 5. All right? And in order to get this decimal, we have to go ahead and divide the numerator divided by the denominator, where 2 is our dividend and 5 is our divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 2? Well, it doesn't, so we're going to add a 0. Then after the 2, we're going to add a decimal point and a 0. Make sure that you bring up the decimal point when we're dividing. Then, ignoring the decimal point we added here, we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 20? Well, 5 goes into 20 4 times, and that's because 5 times 4 is equal to 20. We're going to write the 20 underneath, and then we're going to subtract. 20 minus 20 is equal to 0. So we have no remainder, and that means that 2 over 5 is equivalent to 4/10. Right? Now we're going to take 3 over 5 and write that as a decimal. So that means we have to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So 3 is going to be our dividend, and 5 is going to be our divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 3? Well, 5 does not go into 3, so we're going to add a 0. Then after the 3, we're going to add a decimal point and a 0. Make sure you bring up that decimal point. And then ignoring the one we added, we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 30? Well, 5 goes into 30 6 times, and that's because 5 times 6 is equal to 30. We write the 30 underneath, and then we subtract. 30 minus 30 is equal to 0, so we have no remainder, and that means that 3 over 5 is equivalent to 6/10. Then we're going to go ahead and find the decimal equivalent to 4 over 5. And in order to do this, we have to divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So 4 divided by 5, where 4 is our dividend and 5 is our divisor. We ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 4? Well, 5 does not go into 4, so we're going to add a 0 above it. Then we're going to add a decimal point after the 4 and add a 0. Make sure you bring the decimal point up. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 40? Well, 5 goes into 40 8 times, and that's because 5 times 8 is equal to 40. We're going to write the 40 there and then subtract. 40 minus 40 is 0, so we do not get a remainder. So 4 over 5 is equivalent to 8/10. Right? So now that we know the decimal equivalent to 1 over 5, 2 over 5, 3 over 5, and 4 over 5, we notice a pattern here. So our number line is actually increasing by 2/10. So if we add another 2/10, we're going to get 1 and 2/10. If we add another 2/10, we're going to get 1 and 4/10. If we add another 2/10, we're going to get 1 and 6/10. If we add another one, we're going to get 1 and 8/10. If we add another one, we're going to get 2. If we add another one, we're going to get 2 and 2/10. If we add another one, we're going to get 2 and 4/10. If we add another one, we're going to get 2 and 6/10. And then 2 and 8/10. And then 3. So now that we have the decimal equivalent, we could go ahead and see how 1/5 and 1 and 1/5 have different whole numbers, but the decimal part is the same, and that goes with 2 and 1/5 as well. So the decimal that it ends with is the same, so we notice a pattern here with our fractions written in decimal form. Now we could get rid of our fractions and our mixed numbers so that we could just see our decimals on this number line. Now if we had a vertical number line and we're writing the decimal equivalents to 1/5, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to follow the pattern that it's increasing by 2/10. So we have 0, then we have 2/10, 4/10, 6/10, 8/10, 1, 1 and 2/10, 1 and 4/10, 1 and 6/10, 1 and 8/10, 2, 2 and 2/10, 2 and 4/10, 2 and 6/10, 2 and 8/10, and finally 3. So that's it for our number lines counting by fifths.